McGraw-Hill Audio presents more Tales from the Dugout, more of the greatest true baseball stories of all time. Written by Mike Shannon, read by Lloyd James. Preface. While the stories in this book were polished for you, I did originally find them in the dugouts of America, both literally and figuratively, meaning that I went out and personally talked to the actual storytellers behind the tales in the book. Some of these people I found at the ballpark, and some of them I found away from it. I want to express my gratitude to all of them. Typical are the encounters I've had with people like Kent Tekulve. Kent Tekulve was very generous with his time and memories. In fact, I was so delighted with the tales he told me that I forgot to get from him the details of the one story I came prepared to ask him about. A second-hand version of it will still give you a good idea about the type of person Tekulve is. To commemorate the last ball game ever played at Pittsburgh's Three River Stadium on October 1st, 2000, the Pirates brought back a number of players from the team's past, who were introduced on the field at the conclusion of the game between the Pirates and the Chicago Cubs. The last player scheduled to be introduced was Tekulve, who was supposed to deliver the last pitch ever thrown in the ballpark in honor of the many times he had closed out Pirate victories at Three Rivers. Tekulve followed the script by making his appearance to the sound of Rubber Band Man, the song the Pirates had always played as his introductory music when he was coming in from the bullpen. But he didn't, as expected, close out the Three Rivers era in Pirates history. Instead, he called over to his old friend and teammate, the ailing Willie Stargell, and insisted that Pops have the honor of throwing to catcher Jason Kendall the ceremonial final pitch. The gesture touched everyone who saw it, and illustrated better than any words could have the bond of brotherhood that made the 1979 Pirates a loving baseball family. The stories to follow are meant to entertain above all else, but I would like to think that more than a few of them are also inspirational to some degree or another. Whether you want to be a better ball player, a better friend, or a better person, there are good examples here to follow. Richie Ashburn. Possessing one of the most recognizable voices in sports broadcasting, Harry Kalas has been calling the games at the Philadelphia Phillies since 1971. For many years, Kalas's partner was Richie Whitey Ashburn, who went into broadcasting after completing his Hall of Fame career as a center fielder for the Phillies and New York Mets. To illustrate Ashburn's great sense of humor, Kalas tells the following story. Richie Ashburn was a joy to work with because he not only brought baseball expertise to the broadcasting booth, but laughter as well, says Kalas. One thing that Whitey used to do, when it would be getting late in the evening and we were getting hungry, he'd say, "I wonder if the folks at Celebra's Pizza are listening to the broadcast." And of course, 15 minutes later, 2 delicious pizzas would be delivered to the press box. Well, after he did this for a while, the Phillies brass called him in and said, "Look, Richie, you can't be giving away free plugs during the broadcast to Celebra's Pizza. They're not one of our sponsors." Now, we may not have been allowed to give away free advertising, but we were always allowed to mention people's birthdays and anniversaries, to offer our congratulations for things like that. So the next night, it got to be about that time in the game, and we were getting hungry as usual. So about the 7th inning, Richie said, "Harry, I'd like to send out our warmest birthday greetings to the Celebra's twins, plain and pepperoni." Joe Assanio. In the old days, rookies were often not welcomed onto a major league ball club. For one thing, the arrival of a rookie usually meant the release of a veteran who was already the friend of the other players. For another, it was considered standard operating procedure to abuse rookies in order to test them. Rookies these days still undergo some hazing, but as the experiences of Joe Assanio show, the harassment is generally good-natured. Assanio was a hard-throwing relief pitcher who made his major league debut in 1994 after having languished for several years in the farm system of the Pittsburgh Pirates. "The day they called me up was a whirlwind," says Joe. "I'm from Kingston, New York, so having heard about the Yankees all my life, it was an awesome thing just to walk into Yankee Stadium as a player for the first time. The next thing I know, I'm in the Yankees clubhouse. I'm getting fitted for a Yankees uniform, and I'm meeting all these great baseball players who are now my teammates. We have a workout, and then before I can catch my breath, we're on a bus to Newark Airport, because we're flying to Seattle to start a new series. It had been a long, exciting day for me, and I was worn out, so I thought I'd get some sleep on the plane. No way. Pitcher Bob Wickman kept waking me up, saying, "Hey, rookie, no rookies sleeping on the plane." I said, "Oh, come on, Bob. Just let me sleep for a couple of hours." Nope. So I got up and started playing cards with them. As luck would have it, I wiped them all out, and of course they didn't like that a whole lot either. When we got back to New York, we opened a series at home against the Boston Red Sox, and I was excited to see that former Red Sox outfielder Jim Rice was Boston's hitting instructor. I grabbed a couple of new baseballs and went over to ask him to autograph them. I told him that he had been my favorite player when I was a kid. He said, "You liked me?" I guess he was surprised to hear me say that because he is kind of intimidating. He's a big, strong guy, usually has a scowl on his face, and has a reputation for being surly with the media. I said, "Yes, sir, I liked you very much." "You want to know your batting stats for 1979? He laughed, signed the balls, and wished me luck. I was thrilled to get his autograph, but my teammates on the Yankees really ragged me about it as being a Bush League thing to do, to ask the opposition for an autograph, and they fined me for it in kangaroo court, but I didn't care. I was glad I'd done it, because I didn't know if I'd ever get the chance to get Jim Rice's autograph again. My teammates screwed with me in some other little ways, but really they were great to me. The other guys in the bullpen in particular, pitchers Steve Howe, Bob Wickman, and Xavier Hernandez, really took me under their wing. They were the best, and they wouldn't let me pay for anything. They never let me pay for a cab or pick up a lunch tab, even though I was earning more money than I ever had before in my life. It was always, "Put your money away, Rook." I guess my rookie money just wasn't any good to them. One day I finally pleaded with Xavier Hernandez to let me pay for breakfast. He said, "Okay, give me $20. When I pulled out a $20 bill and handed it to him, he ripped it in half and gave the pieces back to me. He said, "If you ever try to give me money again, I'm going to rip it in half again." So I said, "Okay, don't worry. I'll never try to give you money again." Doug Bear. Relief pitcher Doug Bear faced a long, tough road to get to the big time, but he never gave up and finally made his debut in the major leagues in 1976 with the Pittsburgh Pirates when he was 27 years old. Although Bear never duplicated his best season, when he won 7 games, saved 28, and fashioned a sparkling 1.97 ERA for the Cincinnati Reds in 1978, he competed ferociously every spring for a job in baseball, and he wound up putting together a 15-year career with 7 different major league clubs. Bear truly loved to play the game, so much so that after he retired from professional baseball, he played amateur ball for several summers in an over 30 men's league in Cincinnati. Bear's approach to pitching in these amateur games was the same as it had been when he was a pro, and the players in the men's league hung the nickname Rambo on him. Bill Laughery, one of the players in the Cincinnati Men's League, tells a story that reveals this side of Bear's personality. In the winter of 1991, my buddy Milt Cattleman got a call from Bear, who asked if he could work out with us at the batting cage, says Laughery. Bear, who'd been released by Pittsburgh, wanted to get ready for spring training tryouts because he still wanted to pitch in the big leagues. Of course, Mel told him, "Sure, come on over." The next day, Bear comes out to the batting cage, and Mel and I are thrilled to meet him. Bear asks if one of us can warm him up, so Mel grabs a catcher's mitt and Bear starts throwing to him. When Bear gets loose, he turns to me and asks if I want to hit. So I jumped into the cage and step up to the plate. Bear throws me 8 or 9 pretty good fastballs, and I hit them okay. And then he says he's going to throw 8 or 9 curveballs. Once I see how the ball is breaking, I hit some of them okay too. Then Bear says he's going to throw some sliders. The first one comes in. It breaks pretty good, and I just look at it. And Bear gets all excited. "Oh my gosh," he says, "that's unhittable. That's a major league slider." That's a Rob Dibble slider. Well, he throws me another good slider, and I just get a piece of it. Foul tip it. By now I know how it's going to break, so when he throws the third one, I'm able to meet it. I don't hit it hard, I just kind of lean out and stick the bat on the ball, and it flares off to the right side of the cage. The next pitch is a fastball, right at my head. He doesn't throw it as fast as he can, and I'm able to pull my head out of the way, but it's definitely a brushback pitch. Mel and I can't believe it. We barely know the guy, and it's just a practice session, but none of that matters to Bear. He comes off the mound, walks halfway to the plate, and says, Billy, that part of the plate out there on the outside corner, that belongs to me. Mary Barney. Professional baseball is still pretty much an all-male domain, and while it is no longer rare to find a female in a front office position, it takes a special woman to earn a real place in the old boys club that rules the game. Such a person is Mary Barney, a longtime employee of the AAA Louisville Bats and the team's current director of baseball operations. Surprisingly enough, Barney did not acquire her love of baseball from either her father or her husband. She grew up in Chicago and developed an attachment to the Cubs pretty much by herself, thank you very much. We were the first family on the block to own a television, and I never missed a Cubs game on WGN, says Barney. People ask me how I came to love baseball, and I tell them that the only time I ever ironed was when the Cubs were on TV. They think I'm kidding, but I'm not. Okay, but it's a long way from being just another Cubs fan to achieving a high-level front office position with a AAA franchise, and in making that leap, Barney had help from her husband, but just a little. Barney's husband was a big-shot advertising executive in Chicago. After he got transferred to Louisville, he picked up the Bats' predecessors, the Louisville Redbirds, as an account. With her kids in school, Barney decided she wanted to work outside the home, doing something she would love to do, so she set her sights on the Redbirds. Her husband's relationship with the team may have gotten her foot inside the door, but Mary herself had to convince A. Ray Smith, the team's crusty, eccentric owner, that she knew baseball. When A. Ray interviewed me, he asked me what the number 7 means, says Mary. I told him, Mickey Mantle. I knew he didn't mean the left fielder, which is number 7 in scorekeeping, so he could see that I did know baseball. After the interview, A. Ray invited my husband and me to a big dinner the organization had to celebrate the signing of Ken Boyer as our manager, and he placed me at the table between Boyer and Lee Thomas, who was the Cardinals' farm director at the time. Again, as a let's see if she knows baseball test. I remember that Thomas was impressed when I said, Didn't you play for the Cubs and later in Japan toward the end of your career? So I got the job. The testing didn't stop there, but Mary showed she could handle the kidding and whatever else the guys wanted to dish out. One day Tracy Woodson asked me to sew the strap back onto his jock, which had turned pink in the laundry, by the way. Mike Jorgensen, an ex-big leaguer who was working in the Cardinals scouting department, called me on the phone and asked what I was doing. Sewing up Tracy Woodson's jockstrap, I said. He laughed and said, No, really, Mary, what are you up to? I knew he was in on the joke, so I just played along and didn't get mad about it. A lot of the ball club's players and young front office interns started calling Barney Mom because she would do little things to take care of them and because they knew they could always come into her office to talk to her. When that same Tracy Woodson was knocked unconscious in a collision at first base in the last game of the season one year, it was Barney who stayed behind in an Indianapolis hospital to mother him. To make sure that Tracy did not lapse into a coma, I had to wake him up every 2 hours, she says. I stayed up all night with a book and a Diet Coke. Barney's sense of humor and concern for others made her popular, but she moved right on up the ladder to her present position because she was dedicated, talented, and most of all, trustworthy. I proved that I could keep my mouth shut when it was necessary to protect the integrity of trades, roster moves, and the like, she says, and I slowly gained access into the inner sanctums. Barney was finally recognized for her accomplishments, and contributions to the game when she won the 2000 Professional Baseball Woman Executive of the Year Award, which is presented by the Rawlings Sporting Goods Company. I think every woman in the game, if she knows of the award, aspires to win it, says Marnie. When she learned that she was going to be presented with the award at the baseball winter meetings, she realized she would have to give an acceptance speech. I was reminded of the Oscars and how boring I think the speeches are when the winners go on and on thanking everybody. But then I realized that you do have to thank a lot of people because you don't have your success by yourself. A lot of other people contribute to it. My husband, who was an advertising writer, said, "Don't you want me to write your speech for you?" I said, "No, I certainly do not." I can't remember all that much about what I said besides thanking a lot of people, but I do remember the line I closed with. The winter meetings took place that year in the middle of the voting mess between George Bush and Al Gore, so I said, "You may not know who the next president of the United States is, but you do know who the proudest woman in professional baseball is." When I got back to our table, my husband said, "Bravo, I couldn't have done it any better." Johnny Bench. Blessed with great physical abilities, he could dunk a basketball and hold 6 baseballs in one hand. Johnny Bench is also smarter than the average bear. The valedictorian of his high school class, Bench has always displayed a good sense of humor, a sure sign of intelligence. In kidding good-naturedly about the size of his hometown of Binger, Oklahoma, Bench once said, "After I won the National League Rookie of the Year award in 1968, Binger held a parade in my honor. There was nobody standing on the sidewalks when the parade went by because everybody in town was in the parade." Another thing about Bench, during his major league career, he was the consummate clutch player. Here are only 2 of the many examples of that ability to perform at his best when the pressure was on. In the 5th and deciding game of the 1972 National League playoffs between the Cincinnati Reds and the Pittsburgh Pirates, Bench led off the bottom of the 9th inning with the Reds trailing by a run. Johnny's mother walked down to the railing by the dugout and pleaded with her son to hit a home run. The obedient Bench did just that, tying the game, which the Reds then went on to win. 11 years later, Bench was honored at Riverfront Stadium during the final month of his career. In front of an electrified sellout crowd, Bench was showered with going-away presents. Many friends and teammates delivered testimonials to his greatness, and then Bench himself addressed the crowd, concluding his short speech with the promise that, "I'm going to try like hell to play good for you tonight." In the first inning, Houston Astros pitcher Mike Madden walked Bench, drawing a chorus of boos from the crowd. But in the 3rd inning, Bench came to bat again. Madden got the ball over the plate, and Bench came through with yet another on-demand performance, smoking a home run to left, the 389th of his career, to make Johnny Bench night an unforgettable experience for anyone who was there to witness it. And what, by the way, do you get for the ball player who has enough money to buy whatever he wants? Who knows? In this day of major league salaries that are the equivalent of the GNP of small countries, but here's a sample list of the gifts that the game's greatest backstop received on Johnny Bench night. A fishing boat. A wheelbarrow full of golf balls, one for each of Bench's career home runs. A sterling silver plate embedded with the number 5, made of rubies. A golfing trip to Scotland, and a new Ford Bronco. Todd Benzinger. Todd Benzinger is remembered for catching the pop-up that ended the 1990 World Series, a startling 4-game sweep by the Cincinnati Reds over the heavily favored Oakland A's. The triumph was sweet revenge for Benzinger, who had been a member of the Boston Red Sox squad, which itself had been swept by the A's in the 1988 American League Championship Series. Yet, contrary to popular speculation, Todd's moment in the World Series spotlight is not his most memorable moment in baseball. First of all, our victory over Oakland was not a fluke, says Benzinger. We wouldn't have beaten them 20 out of 20 games, but we would have beaten them in every 4-game series we played them. We weren't the most talented team in baseball. We weren't even in the top 5, but we matched up well with Oakland. Sometimes that sort of thing just happens, especially in basketball. You think you're better than another team, but you lose because you don't match up well with them. Well, we matched up great with Oakland. For instance, the A's were good hitters, but they had trouble with pitchers like Jose Rijo because of the way he pitched. Tom Browning was not a great pitcher, but he was a fly ball pitcher who was the perfect guy for us to throw in Game 3 at their place because they have a big ballpark. They hit a lot of harmless warning track fly balls against Browning. We had a lot of good speed, working against a catcher with a mediocre arm, and we had a bullpen that was second to none, which I guess they weren't even thinking about. All these things added up to give us an advantage over them, and so it wasn't as big an upset as everybody thinks it was. And although I was thrilled to make the last play of that World Series, it probably wasn't as meaningful to me as it was to everybody else. As far as I'm concerned, the most memorable thing about my career was getting called up to the major leagues by the Boston Red Sox. I think a lot of players feel the same way, even players who go on to be big stars. There's just something about that moment when you get the call, when you know that all your hard work is finally going to pay off. It's such a thrill, it's almost surreal. It was a moment I'll never forget because, for me, it wasn't just being called up to the big leagues. It was being called up to Fenway Park to play for the Red Sox on a Friday night in the middle of June to play against the New York Yankees, who were in town for the first time that summer, with Roger Clemens on the mound to start the game for us. That's a cut above the typical experience in my book. I didn't get into the game that night, but I remember John McNamara, the Boston manager, asking me in the middle of the game, "Well, how do you like the big leagues, young man?" All I could say was, "Pretty good, Skip, pretty good." I didn't play the next day either, but I got into the third game on Sunday. Bob Tewksbury started for the Yankees and was pitching a great game. He was getting out Wade Boggs, Bill Buckner, Don Baylor, Jim Rice, all our great hitters. I pinch hit for our catcher, Mark Sullivan, in the bottom of the seventh, with the Yankees winning 2-1, nobody on and 2 outs. Tewksbury walked me on 4 pitches, not intentionally, but he pitched me very carefully. He did that because I'd hit a home run off him the year before in AAA, and he remembered me. I'm sure the people in the stands, the Boston fans who are very knowledgeable, were wondering why Tewksbury pitched like that to me, a guy making his major league debut. I mean, he didn't even throw me anything close to a strike. So Tewksbury put me on, and then Ellis Burks, the next batter, hit a home run to put us ahead. And I remember thinking how cool it was to walk in my first at-bat, to be shown that kind of respect when the pitcher was getting everybody else in the lineup out. The very best thing about my call-up, though, was telephoning my dad to share the news with him. I'd never looked forward more to making a call to my dad than I did that day. My dad was a hard-working guy who always worked 2 jobs, and a great baseball fan. He was very knowledgeable about baseball history because he read baseball books all the time, and he'd read the same book 5 or 6 times. Anyway, when I got drafted out of high school and left to go to Elmira, New York, to play minor league baseball, my dad, who was a man of few words, said, "Step 1, son. Step 1. The next year, in 1982, when he drove me to the airport for spring training, he said, "Step 2, son. Step 2. And every year he'd say I was taking another step. So the great thing about it was that when I made that phone call to him to say I was going up to the big leagues, he said, "Step 6, son. The last one. You did it." And he was overjoyed to say it, too. Yogi Berra. No one in baseball has ever uttered more funny statements than Yogi Berra, the great Yankees catcher whose zany remarks have become known as Yogi-isms. Berra claims that his humor is always unintentional. "Quotes just happen," he says. When people ask me to say a Yogi-ism, I tell them that I don't make them up on the spot. If I could do that, I'd be famous. We know what Yogi was trying to say there, but the fact remains that anyone who hangs around with him for any length of time is going to pick up a Yogi-ism or two, as did Joe Altobelli, who joined Berra as a coach for the Yankees in 1981 after having served a stint as manager of the San Francisco Giants. At the time, the silly streaking craze had become popular at Comiskey Park. When the Yankees were preparing to make their first trip of the season to Chicago to play the White Sox, the topic of the exhibitionists who would run naked through the grandstands or across the field came up in conversation. "Are most of the streakers male or female?" asked Altabelli. "I don't know," said Yogi. "They always have paper bags over their heads." Books. As hard as it is to believe today, Roger Kahn's classic of baseball literature, The Boys of Summer, received more than a few bad reviews when it was first published in 1971. Fortunately, the snotty reviewers were far outnumbered by ordinary members of the reading public who completely embraced Kahn's searing before and after stories about members of the 1952-53 Brooklyn Dodgers, including Columbus Clippers radio broadcaster Gary Richards, who, as a 15-year-old in 1973, had the sense to recommend the book to his high school English teacher. "I went to high school in Mecca, Ohio, right outside Youngstown," says Gary, "and one day when I was in 9th grade, Mrs. Gates asked us what book we wanted to read as a class. Nobody said a thing, so I raised my hand and suggested that we read The Boys of Summer. I was reading the book at the time and was really moved by the Jackie Robinson part of the story. I'd been going through a school system that was all white from K through 12, and I thought that the book would provide some perspective for some of the rednecks in my class. Mrs. Gates hadn't heard of the book, so she said she'd have to take it home and read it. After she read it, she said she'd have to think about letting us read it as a class because she was worried about some of the language and the sex, which was really only the story about Roy Campanella's wife cheating on him. 9th graders today wouldn't bat an eye over such mild content, but you have to realize that things were different back in 1973. Mrs. Gates decided to ask the principal, Mr. Zeller, about it, and fortunately he was a big baseball fan, so he gave her the okay. When the girls in the class found out we were going to be reading a baseball book, they whined and complained, but Mrs. Gates told them, "This is a story within a story, and the most important things in the book are not necessarily about baseball." Well, the girls quickly changed their minds, and they got really caught up in the book because many of the stories in The Boys of Summer are so touching, such as the one about Carl Erskine's learning disabled son, and they discovered, as Mrs. Gates had discovered, that you don't have to be a big baseball fan to appreciate the book. When we finished The Boys of Summer, I guess I pushed my luck because I recommended that we read Ball 4 next. Mrs. Gates said, "We probably shouldn't read another baseball book." Mr. Zeller, who knew what kind of baseball book Ball 4 was even more adamant about it. It had a lot more of the sex and objectionable language that Mrs. Gates was worried about. He said, "No way." You can't blame a guy for trying, though. So the next book we read wasn't a baseball book. It was a pretty decent substitute, though. The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. Baseball is the most verbal of games. Chatter, storytelling, reminiscing, debate, and just plain conversation are tools of the game as essential as bats, balls, and gloves. Moreover, baseball language has never remained a thing apart, but has always insinuated itself into the larger domain of American speech to a degree surpassed by few other activities. Over the years, the colorfulness and importance of baseball language have attracted a number of linguists, none more important than Paul Dixon, who, in 1989, published the first edition of the greatest book on the subject, the Dixon Baseball Dictionary. While Dixon's book is amazingly comprehensive, students of the game with attentive ears can have a lot of fun playing amateur lexicographer, trying to find words, terms, and phrases not contained in Dixon. For example, Casey Award. Established in 1983 and sponsored by Spitball, the literary baseball magazine, the Casey is a bronze plaque awarded annually to the author of what is voted to be the best baseball book of the year. The Dixon Baseball Dictionary was nominated for the 1989 Casey Award. Credential. A recognition given to sports writers and other working members of the media by baseball teams that allows the accredited media members access to the field, clubhouse, and press box. Also, the paper.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?